I'm Isabella, a 38-year-old naval intelligence officer, but in the eyes of my mother-in-law, a powerful senator, I'm nothing more than a low-born gold digger. Right in the middle of her lavish political party in Washington, D.C., I uncovered a treasonous plot that could sink her entire empire. To track them, I was forced to lie to my own husband, turning him into a pawn in a game he never knew he was playing. The cruelest truth. The mastermind was Arthur Finch, her chief of staff, the man she trusted with her life. They thought I was just some weak daughter-in-law they could easily trample and silence. But they made a fatal mistake. They had no idea they just provoked an intelligence officer, and I will burn their entire empire of lies to the ground to protect national security, even if it means destroying the prestigious Vance name. The chandeliers dripped light, scattering diamonds across the polished marble floor of the National Portrait Gallery. In Washington, D.C., power wasn't just a currency. It was the very air you breathed, thick and heavy with the scent of ambition, expensive perfume, and catered canapés. I've operated in environments far more hostile, where the air was filled with sand and the metallic tang of fear, but none felt as alien as this. Here, the weapons were smiles, the ambushes were introductions, and a single misplaced word could do more damage than a misfired round. My name is Isabella Vance. To the world, or at least the small, gilded part of it assembled here tonight, I was the new, somewhat mysterious wife of Daniel Vance, the beloved son of Senator Eleanor Vance. But my real name, the one that doesn't appear on any party manifest, is Lieutenant Commander Isabella Rossi, United States Naval Intelligence. My job is to see the things that hide in plain sight, and tonight I was off the clock, or so I had told my husband. The truth is, you are never truly off the clock. Daniel squeezed my hand, his warmth a welcome anchor in the swirling sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. "You okay?" he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "You have your threat assessment face on." I forced a small smile, letting the tension in my shoulders ease just a fraction. "Just taking in the scenery, it's a lot." "That's one word for it," he chuckled. Daniel was an art historian, a man who found beauty and meaning in the quiet stillness of the past. He navigated his mother's world with a kind of weary grace, always an observer, never a participant. It was one of the first things I loved about him. He saw me, not the uniform or the security clearance I could never discuss. "Daniel, darling?" A voice, smooth as silk and sharp as glass, cut through the din. And there she was, Senator Eleanor Vance. My mother-in-law. She moved through the crowd like a battleship cutting through calm water, elegant, formidable, and leaving a wake of turned heads behind her. She was dressed in a deep navy suit that was both severe and impeccably chic. Her silver hair was styled in a perfect coif, and her smile, the one that charmed millions on television, never quite reached her eyes, especially when she looked at me. "Mother," Daniel said, kissing her cheek, "you look magnificent." "One does what one must," she replied, her eyes flicking over me from head to toe. I was wearing a simple, dark teal gown. It was tasteful, expensive, and Daniel had helped me pick it out. But in Eleanor's eyes, I could see the verdict: inadequate. "Isabella," she said, her tone a masterclass in polite condescension. "That's a practical choice for a gown, dear. Very no-nonsense. It suits you." The subtext was clear. You don't belong here. You lack the necessary frivolity, the softness. You are an anomaly. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, my voice even. "I find practicality has its own elegance. My training had taught me to control my heart rate, to keep my expression neutral even under interrogation. Dealing with my mother-in-law was excellent practice." "Indeed," she sniffed, already turning her attention to a passing Supreme Court justice. "Judge Albright, how wonderful to see you." Daniel gave my hand another reassuring squeeze. "Don't mind her," he whispered. "It's her default setting." She was probably critiquing the doctor's choice of forceps in the delivery room. I appreciated his attempt at humor, but the sting of her disapproval was a familiar ache. Since Daniel and I had married 6 months ago, Eleanor had made her opinion of me subtly, painfully clear. I wasn't from an old political family. My parents were teachers from Ohio. I had no trust fund, no social pedigree. My career, which I could only describe to her as government logistics, was, in her words, a respectable but rather vague endeavor. She suspected I had married her son for his name, for the access it provided. She saw me as an operator, just a different kind than the one I actually was. She wasn't entirely wrong. I was an operator. She just had the wrong field of battle in mind. "Ah, Jessica, you made it," Eleanor called out, waving over a woman dripping in diamonds and gossip. I'd like you to meet Daniel's wife, Isabella. Isabella, this is Jessica Croft. Her husband is on the Appropriations Committee. So lovely to finally meet you, Jessica gushed, her handshake limp. We've all been so curious. Eleanor has told us so little. Isabella is a very private person, Eleanor said, smiling a little too widely. Her work is very classified. She said the word classified as if it were a synonym for unimportant. Oh, how thrilling, Jessica said, like a spy. I offered a non-committal smile. More spreadsheets than sports cars, I'm afraid. She's being modest, Daniel interjected smoothly. She's one of the sharpest people I've ever met. Eleanor's gaze hardened for a fraction of a second before the practiced political mask slipped back into place. She hated when Daniel defended me. She saw it as a sign of my influence, my control over him. As they chatted about some upcoming charity auction, I let my gaze drift. My training wasn't about looking for spies in the classic sense. It was about baselining. Understanding the normal rhythm of a place, the standard patterns of behavior, so that any deviation, no matter how small, would stand out like a flare in the night. The baseline here was performative. People postured, they laughed too loudly, their gestures were broad as they vied for the attention of someone more important. And then I saw it. A deviation. He was standing near the French Impressionist exhibit. Ambassador Nikolai Volkov, a key diplomat from a strategically important and notoriously duplicitous Eastern European country. He was a known quantity in our world, charming, cultured, with a reputation for being a master of back-channel negotiations. He was talking to a junior senator from Pennsylvania, laughing at something the senator said. It was all perfectly normal. The anomaly wasn't Volkov. It was the man standing about 10 feet behind him, partially obscured by a marble column. He was American, dressed in a well-tailored but unremarkable suit, mid-40s. He wasn't part of the conversation, but his attention was fixed on it. That wasn't unusual. Aides and lobbyists often hovered near their targets. But this was different. He wasn't watching the senator. He was watching Volkov's hands, and his own posture was wrong. He was trying to look relaxed, one hand in his pocket, but his shoulders were too square, his weight perfectly balanced on the balls of his feet. It was the stance of someone ready to move instantly. Not a fighter's stance, but the coiled stillness of a trained handler. He scanned the room methodically, his eyes not lingering on the powerful or the famous, but on the exits, the security staff, the waiters. He was running counter-surveillance, in the middle of a cocktail party. Isabella, are you listening? Eleanor's voice cut through my concentration. I blinked, bringing my focus back to her. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I was just admiring the art. Yes, well, she said, unconvinced. Jessica was just asking what you did before you met Daniel. I was in the Navy, I said simply. Oh, an officer, how wonderful, Jessica cooed. My nephew joined the Coast Guard. He gets to rescue sea turtles. Before I could formulate a polite response, I saw the signal. It was tiny, almost imperceptible. Ambassador Volkov, while still smiling at the senator, subtly shifted the cocktail glass in his left hand from his index and middle finger to his middle and ring finger. A meaningless gesture to anyone else, but across the room, the handler saw it. His own hand, which had been resting on his thigh, twitched. He tapped his index finger twice against his leg. It was a confirmation signal. Clean, efficient, and completely invisible to the untrained eye. My internal alarm, the one honed by years of field work in places I couldn't name, began to pulse with a low, steady hum. This wasn't just a diplomat and his aide. This was a dead drop, a clandestine exchange, and it was happening right here, right now, surrounded by the most powerful people in the nation. If you'll excuse me, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. I think I need some fresh air. Daniel looked at me with concern. Everything all right, Izzy? Perfectly, I lied, placing a light kiss on his cheek. I'll be right back. As I walked away, I felt Eleanor's eyes on my back, cold and judgmental. She thought I was fleeing her social pressure, a provincial girl overwhelmed by the big city. She had no idea I was walking away from her and toward a threat that could destabilize everything she and her powerful friends held dear. The party was no longer a party. It was an active operational theater, and I was the only one who knew it. I didn't go for fresh air. I went for a better vantage point. The terrace doors were thick glass, and from the outside, the reflection of the gallery within was almost a perfect mirror. I stepped into the cool night, the muted sounds of the city a stark contrast to the performative hum of the party. Leaning against the stone balustrade, I kept my body angled away from the doors, feigning an interest in the moonlit gardens below. But my eyes were on the reflection. In the distorted glass, I could see the scene laid out like a tactical map. There was Daniel, now engaged in an animated conversation with a museum curator, his natural element. There was a leaner, holding court with two other senators and a lobbyist, her posture radiating an effortless authority. And there, near the column, was my target, the handler. Ambassador Volkov had moved on, drawn into another circle, but the handler remained. He hadn't moved a muscle. He was patient. That alone told me he was a professional. Amateurs get anxious. They fidget. Professionals have an economy of motion that is both unnerving and deeply familiar. My mind raced, sorting through possibilities. What was being exchanged? It could be anything from classified documents to financial information to simple instructions. Who was the handler? His lack of an obvious connection to Volkov suggested he was a local asset, not embassy staff. An American, a traitor. The thought landed with a cold, heavy weight in my gut. I needed to alert someone. Pulling out my phone was out of the question. It was a rookie move that screamed, I'm doing something I shouldn't be. I needed a direct line, someone on the inside. My gaze swept the reflection again, searching. My unit wasn't tasked with domestic counterintelligence, but jurisdictional lines had a way of blurring when national security was at stake. There had to be someone here. At an event of this magnitude, the agencies always had eyes and ears on the ground. And then I saw him, Commander Marcus Thorne, my direct superior. He was standing near the bar, talking to a congressman from the House Intelligence Committee. He looked perfectly at ease, a man enjoying a drink, but I knew better. Marcus Thorne didn't relax, he observed. His presence here wasn't a coincidence. I had my opening. I pushed off the balustrade and walked back inside, my path taking me on a wide arc toward the powder room, a route that would conveniently pass right by the bar. As I approached, Marcus's eyes met mine for a brief, calculated moment. There was no flicker of surprise, only a quiet acknowledgement. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice level as I passed. He used my married name, respecting my cover. "I didn't expect to see you enjoying the arts tonight." "Commander," I replied, pausing as if I'd just recognized him. "The things we do for family, I trust you're having a more productive evening than I am." The congressman he was with smiled politely. "Commander Thorne and I were just discussing naval appropriations." "A fascinating topic, I'm sure," I said, my eyes briefly meeting Marcus, again. I gave him the signal. It was a phrase we'd developed for situations exactly like this, plausible deniability wrapped in cocktail party chatter. "I was just telling my husband that the European art collection is particularly active tonight, specifically the Eastern European wing." His expression didn't change, but I saw the minute tightening around his eyes. He understood. European collection meant a foreign national. Active meant an ongoing operation. Eastern European wing specified the region. "Is that so?" he replied smoothly. "I've always had a keen interest in that period. Perhaps I'll take a closer look." "Thank you for the recommendation. Congressman, if you'll excuse me." He gave me a curt nod and moved away, not towards the art, but towards the edge of the room where he could observe the entire floor. I had passed the baton. Now I had backup. I continued my walk, the adrenaline sharpening my senses. My personal mission had changed. I was no longer just an observer. I was the primary asset on the ground. I had to identify the handler and track the exchange without being made. I saw the handler finally move. He pushed off the column and began a slow, meandering path through the crowd, never walking in a straight line, using other guests as mobile cover. He was heading for the main rotunda towards the cloakroom. My heart beat a little faster. The cloakroom was a classic dead drop location. Public yet anonymous, high traffic, low observation. I couldn't follow him directly. Instead, I changed my own course, looping around a large sculpture, keeping a group of laughing guests between us. He reached the cloakroom desk and handed the attendant a ticket. He didn't check a coat. He retrieved one, a plain black trench coat. He slung it over his arm and walked away, disappearing into the crowd heading towards a side exit. That wasn't the drop. That was stage one. Too simple, too direct. My instincts told me there was another layer. I held my position, my eyes fixed on the cloakroom. The attendant, a young woman who looked bored out of her mind, was busy hanging another fur stole. 1 minute passed. Then 2, then a different man approached the counter. He was older, balding, with a soft, forgettable face. He looked like an accountant or a mid-level bureaucrat. He didn't have a ticket. He leaned in and spoke quietly to the attendant. I was too far away to hear, but I could read her lips. A black trench coat. "My friend, Mr. Smith, left it for me." The attendant nodded, took a step back, and pulled the exact same coat the handler had just checked off the rack. She handed it to the new man. He nodded, turned, and walked away in the opposite direction. It was a two-stage cutout. A textbook intelligence exchange designed to ensure the primary players never met. The handler drops the package, the cutout retrieves it. Clean. The man with the coat was now the priority. He was holding the package. I began to move, ready to follow him, when a voice stopped me cold. "Mrs. Vance, there you are." I turned. It was Arthur Finch, Eleanor's fiercely loyal, perpetually suspicious chief of staff. He was a small, neat man whose mild appearance concealed a mind like a steel trap. He had always looked at me as if I were a puzzle he was determined to solve, and one he was sure he wouldn't like the answer to. "Arthur," I said, forcing a smile. "I was just on my way back." "The senator was asking for you," he said, his eyes scanning the direction I had been heading. "She's about to give a small, impromptu toast. She felt it would be conspicuous if you weren't by Daniel's side." His message was, as always, layered. "We noticed you were gone. We noticed for how long. Get back in line." I looked past him. The cutout was disappearing through the doors leading to the main exit. I had lost him. A wave of frustration washed over me, hot and sharp, but I couldn't show it. My cover was my only weapon right now. "Of course," I said, my voice bright and compliant. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. Thank you for finding me, Arthur." He gave a thin, knowing smile. "It's my job, Mrs. Vance, to keep track of the senator's assets." As I walked back to Daniel's side, placing a hand on his arm and smiling up at him as if I hadn't a care in the world, my mind was a maelstrom. I had the handler's face memorized. I had the cutout's face memorized. I knew an exchange had happened. But I had no package, no proof, and I was now being corralled back into the gilded cage of my new life, a role I had to play flawlessly, while the real world, my world, was spinning into a crisis right under everyone's noses. Eleanor was about to raise her glass, and all I could think about was the man walking out of this building with a piece of our nation's security tucked into his coat pocket. Eleanor tapped her champagne flute with a manicured nail. The light, ringing sound sliced through the ambient chatter, and a wave of silence rippled through the gallery. All eyes turned to her. She thrived in the spotlight. It was her natural habitat. I stood beside Daniel, my hand on his arm, the picture of a supportive daughter-in-law. Inside, my mind was a high-speed processor, replaying the faces, the signals, the exchange. The handler's high cheekbones and the faint, silvery scar above his left eyebrow. The cutout's soft, doughy features, the mole just below his right ear, the scuffed toe of his left Oxford. Details. My trade was built on details. "My dear friends, colleagues," Eleanor began, her voice resonating with practiced warmth. "Thank you all for coming tonight to support this magnificent institution, a repository of our nation's history, a gallery of the faces that have shaped our great destiny." She spoke of legacy, of service, of the burdens and privileges of power. Every word was polished, every phrase calibrated for maximum effect. I had to admit she was good. She could sell sand in the desert. "We are a nation of stories," she continued, her gaze sweeping the room before it settled for just a moment on me. "And families are the first chapter of those stories. It is where we learn our values, our traditions. The Vance family has always believed in service, in putting the needs of the country before our own." Daniel shifted his weight beside me. He knew where this was going. "And I am so proud to see that tradition continue," Eleanor said, now looking at Daniel with genuine affection, "and to welcome new members into our fold." Her eyes slid back to me, the warmth dimming ever so slightly. "Those who come from different traditions, different backgrounds, but who now share in the responsibility of upholding that legacy. It is a heavy weight to bear, but a necessary one." It was a warning, beautifully wrapped in a welcome. A reminder of my status as an outsider, an auxiliary member whose primary duty was not to tarnish the family name. The crowd murmured its polite approval. They heard a tribute to family unity. I heard a queen reminding a commoner of her place at court. "So let us raise a glass," she concluded, "to history, to family, and to the future we build together." "To the future," the room echoed. I lifted my untouched champagne flute to my lips, the bubbles fizzing against my tongue. The taste was bitter. As the applause faded, a swarm of well-wishers enveloped Eleanor. This was my chance. The chaos was my cover. "I'll be right back," I whispered to Daniel, disentangling my arm from his. "Izzy, wait," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "You've barely said a word all night. You look stressed. Is it my mother?" "No, of course not," I lied, forcing a reassuring smile. "Just a bit of a headache. The noise, I suppose. I just need a moment." "Are you sure? Because if she said something—" "Daniel, I'm fine. Really," I said, a little more firmly than I intended. "I'll just be a minute." I turned and walked away before he could press further. I hated lying to him. It was the part of my job that eroded me piece by piece, but his ignorance was his safety. The less he knew about what I really did, the farther he was from the blast radius if something ever went wrong. I needed to get the descriptions to Marcus. I bypassed the powder room, too many people, too many mirrors, and headed for a small, deserted corridor that led to a staff entrance. It was dimly lit, lined with stacked crates from the caterer. Perfect. I pulled the small, elegant clutch Daniel had bought me. Inside, nestled between my phone and a tube of lipstick, was a narrow, unassuming pen. It was a standard issue piece of field tech. It wrote in ink that was only visible under a specific frequency of UV light. I tore a small corner from a cocktail napkin in my purse and quickly scribbled the descriptions, using a coded shorthand we had been trained on for years. H. M. W. 4550 61 190 BRN hair, blue eyes, athel build. Distinguishing mark, scar ~1 cm L eyebrow. Suit, charcoal, no tie. CO, MW 5055 59 170 bald, BRN eyes, soft build. Distinguishing mark, mole, neck, R side. Shoes, black Oxfords, scuffed L toe. The description was concise but comprehensive, enough for Marcus's team to start running facial recognition against known assets, agency watch lists, and public databases. I folded the tiny piece of napkin into a tight square. Now for the delivery. I stepped back out into the gallery. My eyes scanned the room, locating Marcus. He was still near the terrace doors, now speaking with a naval attaché from the British Embassy. Arthur Finch was standing by the main archway, his hawk-like gaze sweeping the party. He was watching for threats to his senator, and in his mind, I was one of them. I needed a diversion, a moment of casual contact that wouldn't register as suspicious. My eyes landed on a waiter carrying a tray of empty glasses. An idea sparked. I started walking towards Marcus, my path deliberately casual. As the waiter passed between us, I took a small, calculated misstep. My heel skidded on the marble. "Oh," I cried out, lurching forward, my arm flailing out as if to catch my balance. I bumped squarely into Marcus. "Oh, Commander, I am so sorry," I said, my voice flustered. "These floors are lethal." "Not at all, Mrs. Vance," he said, his hands steadying my arms. "Are you all right?" In that brief 2-second window of contact, as his hands held my arms and my body was pressed against his, the tiny, folded napkin passed from my palm to his. It was a move we had practiced 100 times in training simulations. The clumsy oaf contact, it was amateurish on purpose. No one suspects the obvious. "I'm fine, thank you," I said, pulling back, just embarrassed. "Don't be," he said, his face impassive, but his eyes told me the message was received. "It can happen to anyone." I turned to walk away, my heart a steady, controlled drumbeat. The first phase was complete, the information was out. "A word of advice, Mrs. Vance." I froze. It was Arthur Finch. He had materialized at my side as silently as a ghost. "Yes, Arthur? Perhaps stick to flats next time," he said, his lips curling into a semblance of a smile. "You wouldn't want to cause an international incident." His eyes flicked from me to Commander Thorne, then back again. He had seen the bump. He hadn't understood it, not fully, but he had registered it as an anomaly. An interaction that didn't fit the pattern. "Thank you for the advice, Arthur," I said, my tone cool. "I'll be sure to run my future footwear choices by your office." I walked away, not looking back, every nerve ending tingling with awareness. I had made the drop, but I had also raised a new flag. Finch was watching. And across the room, as I rejoined Daniel, I saw Alina staring at me. Her expression wasn't one of simple disapproval anymore. It was sharp, analytical. She was no fool. She had built a career on reading people, on sensing shifts in power and loyalty. She knew something was off. I had come to this party facing one adversary. Now, it seemed, I had 3, and the most dangerous ones weren't the spies. They were the ones who shared my new last name. The rest of the evening stretched into a tense, agonizing crawl. I was a prisoner of etiquette, chained to Daniel's side by a smile that felt like it had been chiseled onto my face. Every laugh, every polite inquiry about my life in D.C. was a performance. I was playing the part of Isabella Vance, the senator's new daughter-in-law, while Lieutenant Commander Rossi was screaming inside, desperate to be back at a secure terminal, running profiles and connecting the dots. Arthur Finch was a shadow I couldn't shake. He was always somewhere in my peripheral vision, chatting with a journalist near the bar, murmuring something in Alina's ear, his eyes always finding their way back to me. He was mapping my connections, trying to understand my relationship with Commander Thorne. He saw an unknown variable, and it was his job to neutralize it. Daniel, bless his heart, was oblivious to the undercurrents. He was in his element, discussing the provenance of a Gilbert Stuart portrait with an elderly donor, his passion for his work a bright, honest light in a room full of shadows. "Izzy, look at the brushwork here," he said, drawing me closer to the painting. "You can see the impatience in it, the energy. Stuart didn't just paint faces, he painted personalities." "It's incredible," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. My mind was on the handler's scar, the cut-out scuffed shoe. I was painting my own portraits, assembling personalities from fragmented details. It was Alina who finally provided my escape, though it was far from an act of kindness. She approached us, her arm linked with a stout, red-faced man who radiated the self-importance of old money and inherited power. "Daniel, there you are," she said. "Mr. Albright was just asking about the museum's new acquisition fund. He's thinking of making a significant contribution." Mr. Albright grunted. "My wife insists, says it's better than buying another racehorse." "A wise woman," Alina said smoothly. "Daniel, be a dear and walk him through the prospectus. I'm sure your passion will be far more convincing than some dry pamphlet." She then turned to me. "Isabella, a moment." It wasn't a request. As Daniel led the donor away, Alina steered me towards a quieter corner near a display of antique silver. "I am going to ask you a question, and I expect a straight answer," she said, her voice dropping to a low, confidential tone. "Who is Commander Thorne to you?" I met her gaze without flinching. "He's an old colleague from the Navy, Alina, nothing more." "Don't play games with me," she snapped, the polite facade vanishing. I saw that little display, the contrived stumble. That was not a social accident, that was a communication. "What are you involved in?" I felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. She was sharper than I had given her credit for. She hadn't seen the napkin, but she had read the intent. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, my voice steady. I tripped. He caught me, end of story. "Is it?" Her eyes were like chips of ice. "Let me be perfectly clear, Isabella. My son adores you, for reasons I have yet to fully comprehend. But my primary duty is to my family and my country. If you are bringing trouble to my doorstep, if your vague government work involves anything that could tarnish the Vance name, I will not hesitate. I will cut you out, and I will make it look like your own foolish idea. Do you understand me?" It was a declaration of war. She saw me not just as an unwelcome addition to her family, but as a potential liability, a threat to her carefully constructed empire. "I understand that you're letting your imagination run away with you," I said, my own resolve hardening. She wanted a fight? Fine, I had been trained by the best. "My work is honorable, and it has nothing to do with you or your family. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I see my husband." I turned my back on her, a calculated act of defiance, and walked away. The invisible lines of battle had been drawn. As I rejoined Daniel, I saw Marcus near the main entrance. He was looking at his phone, a subtle signal for me to check mine. I discreetly pulled my own device from my clutch. There was a new message, sent through the secure, encrypted app we used for sensitive communications. It was a single line, "Profile hit, awaiting your signal to proceed." My breath caught. They had found him. The handler or the cutout, maybe both. Marcus needed my go-ahead. He needed to know if the situation was contained or if he needed to escalate to bring an attack team to risk a public scene. My decision would set the next phase in motion. But I was trapped. Alina was watching me. Finch was watching me. Leaving again would be an overt act of insubordination in their world, a confirmation of all their suspicions. I needed a reason, a plausible excuse to get out of here, right now. My eyes fell on Daniel. He was smiling at me, his face open and full of love. And in that moment, a terrible, necessary idea took root. I was going to have to use him. I was going to have to weaponize his love for me to get what I needed. It was a cold, brutal calculation, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. I took a deep breath and let my shoulders slump. I brought a hand to my temple, my fingers trembling slightly, a tremor I consciously manufactured. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice faint. "Izzy, what is it?" His smile vanished, replaced by immediate concern. "Your headache? It's worse," I stammered, leaning against him. "Much worse, I feel dizzy. I think I need to go home." "Of course," he said instantly, his arm wrapping around me. "Right now, let's go." He started to lead me towards the main doors, his focus entirely on me. We passed Alina, who was now talking to the Secretary of State. "Mother," Daniel said, his tone urgent. "Isabella isn't feeling well. I'm taking her home." Alina's eyes narrowed, searching my face for any sign of deception. I let my own eyes droop, focusing on a point on the floor, forcing a slight pallor into my cheeks. It was a trick I'd learned at SEER school: survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. You control your body, you control the narrative. "Is that so?" she said, her voice laced with skepticism. How unfortunate, on such an important evening. She's pale, Daniel insisted, his protective instincts overriding any deference to his mother. I'll call you tomorrow. He didn't wait for her permission. He guided me through the crowd, a protective shield against the curious stares. Arthur Finch watched us leave, his expression a mixture of suspicion and grudging acceptance. There was nothing he could do. A sudden illness was the perfect, unassailable excuse. As the valet pulled our car around, the cool night air felt like a release. Daniel helped me into the passenger seat, his touch gentle. Just breathe, Izzy. We'll be home in 10 minutes. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. I had my exit. But the cost was a lie planted at the heart of my marriage. As we pulled away from the gallery, I took out my phone again, shielding the screen from Daniel's view. Proceed, I typed. Execute Protocol Gamma. Priority 1, Protocol Gamma. It was the authorization for immediate surveillance and, if necessary, intervention. No warrants, no delays. A high-risk, high-reward order. I had just set a team of ghosts loose in the city. And I had used the man I loved as my getaway driver. Eleanor thought the Vance legacy was a heavy weight to bear. She had no idea. The 10-minute drive home was the longest of my life. Daniel drove with a quiet focus, his concern a palpable presence in the car. He kept reaching over to touch my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles. Each touch was a fresh wave of guilt. Maybe we should stop at an urgent care, he suggested, his voice tight with worry. A sudden headache like that could be serious. No, I'll be okay, I murmured, keeping my eyes closed. It's probably just a migraine, the lights, the noise, it was all a bit much. I knew it. I told my mother this wasn't your kind of thing, he said, his frustration with Eleanor evident. She just doesn't listen. She sees these events as extensions of her office, not as a social gathering. Everyone is either an asset or an obstacle. His words were more accurate than he knew. I was an asset, just not hers. And tonight, she had become an obstacle. When we arrived at our Georgetown townhouse, Daniel rushed to open my door, his arm securely around my waist as he helped me inside. Go on, get straight into bed. I'll get you some water and some aspirin. You're the best, I whispered, and I meant it. The lie I was telling felt like a physical weight, a sickness in my gut that was far more real than the headache I was faking. I went upstairs to our bedroom and changed out of the gown, which now felt like a costume from another life. I slipped on a simple t-shirt and pajama pants and got into bed. When Daniel came in with the water, I was under the covers, the lights dimmed. Here, he said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. Can I get you anything else? A cool cloth? No, this is perfect. Thank you, Danny, I said, my voice thick with an emotion that wasn't entirely feigned. I'm sorry about tonight. Don't you dare apologize, he said fiercely, leaning in to kiss my forehead. You have nothing to be sorry for, just rest. I'll sleep in the guest room so I don't disturb you. Okay, I whispered. He was being so kind, so considerate, and it only made the deception sharper. He gave my hand one last squeeze and left, closing the door quietly behind him. I waited, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall. I counted to 100, my ears straining for any sound. Silence. Then I moved. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. I retrieved my clutch from the dressing room and went into the ensuite bathroom, locking the door behind me. I sat on the closed lid of the toilet, the cold porcelain a shock against my skin. I pulled out the burner phone I kept hidden in a concealed pocket of the purse a circumflex, not a circumflex, euros a simple, untraceable device reserved for critical operations. I powered it on. A series of encrypted messages flooded the screen, all from Marcus's command channel. I scrolled through them, my mind absorbing the data, piecing together the last 30 minutes. MSG1, facial rec confirmed, CO ID'd as Frederick Stanton. Mid-level analyst, Department of Commerce, flagged for financial anomalies last 6 mo's, gambling debts. So the cutout was a bureaucrat in over his head. A classic recruitment profile. Desperate men do desperate things. MSG2, handler partial match. High probability he is Ivan Petrov. Former SVR, now operates as freelance intel broker. Known ghost. Last seen Vienna 2 years ago. Petrov. The name sent a jolt through me. He wasn't just a freelance broker, he was a legend in the shadows. A specialist in high-stakes corporate and political espionage. If he was in D.C., the game was far bigger than one indebted analyst. MSG3, Stanton under active surveillance. Proceeded directly to his residence in Arlington. Has not left. PTROV lost in traffic. Vehicle was a rental, found abandoned near Union Station. Ghost protocol initiated, damn it. Petrov was good. He had anticipated being followed and had a pre-planned escape route. Losing him was a major blow, but we had Stanton. We had the package. MSG-4, awaiting your directive on Stanton. Intercept now or wait for contact? This was the critical decision. We could move in now, kick down his door and seize the package, but that was a blunt instrument. It would blow the operation wide open. Volkov would know his network was compromised. Petrov would vanish so deep we'd never find him again. We'd get the message, but we'd lose the network. The other option was to wait, to watch Stanton, see if he contacts anyone else, see if he leads us up the chain. It was a higher risk. He could destroy the package. He could bolt. But the potential reward A tilde cents A circumflex, not A circumflex euros, rolling up an entire hostile intelligence network on U.S. soil A tilde cents A circumflex, not A circumflex euros, was immense. My training screamed for patience, for the long game. I typed my reply, my thumbs flying across the tiny keyboard. Maintain full surveillance on Stanton. Do not intercept. I want to see his next move. Update me on PETROV ghost search. I want to know everyone he so much as breathed near tonight. I sent the message and wiped the phone's memory, then powered it down. My part, for the moment, was done. I was a commander without a command post, running a shadow war from my bathroom floor. I stood up and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide and dark. The stress wasn't faked anymore. The weight of the decisions, the lies, the danger A tilde cents A circumflex, not A circumflex euros, it was all there, etched into my expression. This was the part of the job they didn't put on the recruitment posters, the profound, isolating loneliness of command. I unlocked the door and slipped back into bed just as I heard the floorboards creak in the hallway. Daniel was checking on me. I closed my eyes, forcing my breathing to become deep and even, mimicking sleep. The door opened a crack. I could feel his presence, his worried gaze on me in the darkness. He stood there for a long moment, then quietly closed the door again. I lay there in the silent, opulent bedroom, the sheets feeling like a shroud. I had protected the mission. I had set the pieces in motion for a major intelligence victory, but I had also built a wall of lies between myself and the one person I had sworn to be honest with. Eleanor was wrong. The heaviest weight I had to bear wasn't the Vance legacy. It was the crushing burden of my 2 lives and the constant, gnawing fear that one day they would collide and destroy everything I held dear. And tonight, I could feel the ground beneath my feet beginning to tremble. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. I lay in bed, my body still but my mind racing, constructing a dozen different scenarios. Stanton's house in Arlington became the center of my mental map. I pictured the layout of the street, the potential entry and exit points, the sightlines from neighboring houses. I imagined Marcus's team, ghosts in unmarked sedans, their technology silently peeling back the layers of Stanton's life. They would be pulling his phone records, his financial data, his internet history. They would know who he talked to, what he bought, what he feared. By morning, Frederick Stanton would be a man made of glass, and we would be staring right through him. An hour passed, then 2. The house was silent except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant moan of a siren cutting through the city night. I was about to slip into the bathroom to check my burner phone again when I heard it. A soft chime from downstairs. Daniel's laptop. He was still awake. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had I been careless? Did he suspect something? I slid out of bed, my movements fluid and silent, and crept to the bedroom door, pressing my ear against the cool wood. I could hear the faint, rhythmic clicking of a keyboard. He was working. On a Saturday night, well past midnight. That was unusual. Daniel was disciplined about his work-life balance. He rarely brought his research home. My instincts, honed by years of sniffing out deception, kicked in. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a husband who couldn't sleep. I slipped on a robe and padded silently down the grand, curving staircase. The light from the library at the end of the hall spilled out into the darkness. I approached the doorway, staying in the shadows, and peered around the frame. Daniel was sitting at the large mahogany desk, his back to me, hunched over his laptop. The screen cast a blue glow on his face. He was typing with a rapid, almost frantic intensity. On the desk beside him was a half-empty glass of whiskey. I watched him for a full minute, my mind cataloging the anomalies. The late hour, the whiskey, the urgency in his posture. He wasn't researching 18th century art. This was something else. I stepped into the doorway. "Danny," he jumped, startled, and slammed the laptop shut with a loud clap. The sound echoed in the silent house. He spun around in the leather chair, his face a mask of shock that quickly morphed into a forced, unconvincing smile. "Izzy," he said, his voice a little too high, "What are you doing up? I thought you were asleep. Your headache." It was still throbbing, I lied, walking into the room. "I was coming down for some more water. What are you doing?" "Oh, just, a bit of late-night inspiration," he said, gesturing vaguely at the closed laptop. "An idea for a paper I'm working on. Didn't want to lose the train of thought." My eyes flickered from his face to the laptop, then to the glass of whiskey. "You seem tense." "Just focused," he replied, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He stood up and walked over to the built-in bookshelf, pretending to scan the titles. It was a classic diversion tactic. "You slammed your computer shut like you were hiding something," I said, my voice soft but probing. He laughed, a short, nervous bark. "Don't be silly, it was just a reflex. You startled me. You're so quiet you move like a cat." He turned to face me, his smile strained. "How are you feeling, really?" He was trying to turn the focus back on me to deflect. I had interrogated enough people to recognize the strategy. But this wasn't a hostile asset in a sterile room. This was my husband. My heart ached with a sudden, sharp pain. He was lying to me. "I'm fine," I said, my voice flat. "What's the paper about?" It's about the influence of Dutch maritime trade on Renaissance portraiture," he said. The topic was plausible, but his hesitation was telling. I walked over to the desk. His hand, resting on the smooth wood, was trembling slightly. I placed my hand over his. It was cold. "Daniel, look at me," I said gently. He finally lifted his gaze to mine. In his eyes, I didn't see deception, I saw fear. "What's going on?" I asked. "You can tell me." He pulled his hand away and walked to the window, staring out into the dark garden. "It's nothing, Izzy, just work stress, and my mother, she was awful to you tonight. It gets to me, the way she treats you." It was a plausible lie, a good lie. It was rooted in a truth, Aliner's behavior, which made it feel more real. But it wasn't the whole truth, not even close. The fear in his eyes wasn't about his mother's cattiness. It was deeper, more primal. I knew in that moment that I had a choice. I could press him. I could use my skills to break through his defenses, to corner him until he had no choice but to tell me the truth. It would be easy. I knew his vulnerabilities, his pressure points. I knew him. But I also knew the cost. If I turned my professional self on my husband, I would cross a line that I could never uncross. Our marriage, our intimacy, would become another operational theater, so I made a different choice. I chose to trust the man, even if I didn't trust the story. I would let him keep his secret for now, but I would be watching. "Okay," I said, my voice softening. "I get it. She gets to me too, but we can't let her win, not in our own home." I walked over to him and wrapped my arms around his waist from behind, resting my head against his back. He was stiff at first, then he relaxed into my embrace, his shoulders slumping. "I love you, Izzy," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "I love you too," I replied. "Now come to bed. The Dutch maritime trade can wait until morning." He let me lead him upstairs. But as we lay in the darkness, a new, chilling variable had been added to my equation. The threat wasn't just external anymore. It wasn't just a spy, a handler, and a compromised analyst. There was something else in play, something closer to home. My husband was afraid of something, and whatever it was, it had driven him to lie to me. I felt a profound sense of dread creep over me. I had spent my entire career learning to navigate the intricate webs of international espionage. But I was beginning to realize that the secrets hidden within the walls of my own marriage might be the most dangerous of all. The next morning, the house was filled with a strained, artificial calm. I woke early, my body humming with a sleepless, nervous energy. Daniel was still asleep, his face troubled even in slumber. I left him a note on the bedside table, went for a run. "Love you." Small, normal lie to cover my real mission. In the pre-dawn chill of the Georgetown streets, I found a secluded park bench and pulled out my burner phone. Marcus had been busy. MSG1, Stanton's financials are a disaster. Over $200K in markers to a casino in Atlantic City. The casino is a known front for the Bratva. Volkov's government has deep ties to them. This is our leverage. So the Russian mob was the middleman. It was a classic playbook. They find a target with a weakness, exploit it, and then turn him over to their intelligence service partners. Stanton wasn't just compromised, he was owned. MSG2, Petrov Ghost Search is a dead end so far. He's a professional. But we got a hit on the rental car's GPS history. It made a stop yesterday afternoon, a coffee shop in DuPont Circle. We have security footage. My fingers flew across the screen. Send footage. A few seconds later, a compressed video file appeared. I played it. The quality was grainy, but it was clear enough. There was Petrov buying a coffee, looking like any other DC professional. He sat at a small table. A few minutes later, another man sat down with him. They didn't speak. They just sat back to back at adjacent tables. The new man left his briefcase on the floor. Petrov left his. When they got up to leave, they each took the other's briefcase. A simple, elegant swap in a public place. I froze the frame on the new man's face. My blood ran cold. I knew him. It was Arthur Finch, Eleanor's chief of staff. My mind reeled, struggling to process the information. Finch. The hawk-eyed, ever-loyal Finch was meeting with a Russian intelligence broker. It didn't make sense, or did it make a terrifying kind of sense? He was in a position of immense trust, with access to Eleanor's entire political and personal life. He controlled her schedule, her correspondence, her secrets. What was in that briefcase? What was he giving them? What was he getting in return? And the most critical question of all, was Eleanor involved? Was my mother-in-law, the formidable Senator Vance, a patriot who spoke of legacy and service, a traitor? I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. This wasn't just a case anymore. This was a 5-alarm fire directly inside my own family. My carefully constructed walls between my personal and professional lives were not just crumbling, they had been dynamited. I stood up from the bench, my mind a whirlwind. I needed to get back to the house. I needed to observe. I needed to understand what Daniel was hiding and if it was connected to this. Was his fear last night about his mother? Did he know something? When I got back, Daniel was in the kitchen, making coffee, the picture of domestic normalcy, but the tension in his shoulders was still there. "Hey," he said, forcing a smile. "Feel better?" "Much. The run helped," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee, my movements deliberately casual. "Any plans for today?" "I was thinking we could just take it easy. Go to the farmer's market, maybe see a movie, just us." It was a plea for normalcy, a desperate attempt to pretend that the world wasn't tilting on its axis. "Sounds perfect," I said. Just then, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his face tightened. It was his mother. "I should take this," he said, stepping into the library for privacy. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I had placed a listening device, the size of a grain of rice, under the library desk 2 months ago. It was a precaution, a standard security sweep of my own home that I'd never thought I'd actually have to use. Now I pressed a small, discreet button on the side of my watch. The audio feed began playing, crystal clear, through a tiny, flesh-colored earpiece I always wore. "Don't know what you're talking about, Mother," Daniel was saying, his voice strained. "Don't lie to me, Daniel." Eleanor's voice was sharp, unforgiving. "Finch told me everything. He saw your face last night. He said you looked like you'd seen a ghost when you were on your laptop. What did you find?" My breath hitched. Finch had reported Daniel's strange behavior to Eleanor. "It's nothing," Daniel insisted. "Just some old family files I was sorting through. You're both being paranoid." "Paranoid?" she scoffed. "Arthur Finch's job is to be paranoid. He said you were accessing the encrypted server, the one your father set up, the one you are not supposed to have the password for. So I'll ask you again. What did you find?" A long silence. I could hear Daniel's ragged breathing. "I found the payments," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "From the Lockridge account to the Shell Corporation in the Caymans. They've been going on for years, Mother. After Father died, the payments continued. They came from your accounts." "What is it? What are you paying for?" My world tilted. Lockridge, as in Lockridge Dynamics, one of the biggest defense contractors in the country. A company Eleanor had championed in the Senate, securing them billions in government contracts. "That is none of your concern," Eleanor said, her voice dangerously low. "You will close those files, you will delete your search history, and you will never speak of this to anyone, especially not to your wife." "Why?" Daniel pressed, his voice gaining a desperate edge. "What is this, blackmail? Is someone threatening you?" "Daniel," she said, and her tone shifted. It was no longer commanding, it was pleading. A sound I had never heard from her before. "You have to trust me. This is complicated. It's about protecting your father's legacy, about protecting this family. Please, for your own good and for Isabella's, let it go." The call ended. I stood frozen in the kitchen, the coffee cup trembling in my hand. Daniel was not afraid of something. He was afraid for someone, for his mother. He had stumbled upon a secret financial trail, a potential scandal that linked his mother, a powerful defense contractor, and offshore accounts. He was trying to protect her, and I had just discovered that her right-hand man, the man who was currently trying to intimidate her son into silence, was an asset for Russian intelligence. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't about blackmail. This was about payment. Lockridge Dynamics, through Eleanor Vance, was paying the Russians. But for what? For silence? For influence? Or for something much, much worse? Arthur Finch wasn't just Alina's chief of staff, he was her handler. And my husband, in his innocent search for truth, had just stumbled into the middle of a high-level treason plot that could bring down not just his family, but a pillar of the United States government. Alina's warning to me last night wasn't about protecting the Vance name from my humble origins. It was about protecting her criminal conspiracy from my professional curiosity. She wasn't afraid I'd tarnish her legacy. She was afraid I'd uncover it. Daniel walked out of the library, his face pale and drawn. He looked like a man who had just stared into an abyss. He saw me standing by the counter and tried to assemble a smile, but it crumbled before it could form. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice deliberately gentle. I had to play this perfectly. He was a civilian caught in the crossfire, and his fear was making him unpredictable. "Yeah," he lied, his voice hollow. "Just mom being mom, fretting about some charity gala finances." He walked past me to the coffee pot and refilled his cup, his hands unsteady. He was a terrible liar. It was one of the things I loved most about him. Right now, it was a terrifying liability. "She sounded intense," I prodded, watching his reflection in the polished chrome of the espresso machine. "You know how she gets," he mumbled into his cup. "She thinks passion is a substitute for management skills." He was closing himself off, building a wall just as I had done to him the night before. We were a husband and wife orbiting each other in a solar system of secrets. I needed to get a message to Marcus, an urgent update that would fundamentally change the parameters of the operation. This was no longer just about a low-level analyst and a freelance spy. This was now a potential political espionage case involving a sitting U.S. senator and a major defense contractor. This was a case that could trigger a constitutional crisis, but I couldn't leave. I couldn't risk raising Daniel's suspicions, or worse, leaving him alone and vulnerable. Finch and Petrov knew that Daniel was digging. If they perceived him as a threat, they wouldn't hesitate to neutralize him. My presence was his only protection, so I made a decision. I would bring the operation to me. "You know what?" I said, my voice suddenly bright. "Forget the farmer's market. It's going to be packed. I have a better idea. Why don't we have a few people over for a barbecue this afternoon? Just casual, a couple of my old Navy friends. It's been ages since you've seen Marcus." Daniel looked up, surprised. "A barbecue today? Are you sure you're feeling up to it?" "I'm feeling much better," I said, putting on my most convincing everything is normal smile. And honestly, I could use the distraction. Being around old friends might be just the thing I need to shake off last night. It was a risk. Bringing active intelligence officers to my home, putting them in the same physical space as Daniel, Alina's compromised son. But it was a calculated one. It would provide me with a secure, in-person channel to Marcus. It would also create a bubble of security around Daniel. No one would make a move on him if he was surrounded by naval intelligence officers. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, okay, that sounds nice." "Great," I said. "I'll make a few calls, you man the grill." I walked out to the patio, phone in hand, and dialed a secure number for Marcus's direct aide. "Hey Jen, it's Isabella. Quick question, is the commander free for a last-minute barbecue this afternoon? Say, 1400 hours? Great. And tell him to bring Sarah and Mike from analytics. They still owe me for that fantasy football loss." Sarah and Mike weren't just analysts. They were my two best field technicians, experts in electronic surveillance and data recovery. I was assembling my team. An hour later, the pieces were in motion. Daniel was on the patio, reluctantly cleaning the grill. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a salad, my mind working on the logistics of the afternoon. How to get Marcus alone. How to brief Sarah and Mike without Daniel noticing. The doorbell rang at precisely 2 p.m. It was Marcus, along with Sarah and Mike. They were dressed in jeans and polo shirts, carrying a six-pack of beer and a store-bought apple pie. They looked like any other group of friends arriving for a weekend cookout. "Mrs. Vance," Marcus said with a warm smile as I opened the door. "Get in here, you," I laughed, giving him a quick hug. The gesture allowed me to murmur in his ear, unheard by anyone else. "We have a massive problem. The senator, code black." I felt him stiffen slightly, but his smile didn't waver. "Good to see you too, Izzy. Smells good. Is that Dan's famous marinade I smell?" As they came inside, Mike, a lanky tech genius with a perpetually boyish grin, handed me the pie. "From my mom's recipe," he said. As I took it from him, his fingers brushed mine. I felt the small, hard object he passed to me, a microSD card. "Thanks, Mike. Tell her I said hello," I said, taking the pie to the kitchen. Daniel came in from the patio, and for the next hour we played our parts. We laughed. We talked about old times. We debated the merits of the Navy football team's new offense. It was a perfect illusion of normalcy. I finally got my chance when Daniel sent Marcus to the library to find a specific bottle of bourbon his father had loved. I followed a moment later, carrying a tray of clean glasses. "He doesn't know anything," I said in a low, urgent whisper as soon as the door was closed. "Code Black, Izzy," Marcus said, his friendly demeanor gone, replaced by the sharp focus of a commander. "Are you sure? Her chief of staff, Arthur Finch, is Petrov's contact. I saw the footage. He's the one who made the briefcase swap." Marcus's face went rigid. "Finch, damn it. And you think the senator is involved?" Daniel found offshore payments from her accounts, funneled through Lockridge Dynamics. He confronted her this morning. She told him to drop it for his own safety and for mine. "She's protecting something, Marcus, and Finch is in the middle of it." "This is bad," he breathed, running a hand over his face. "This is as bad as it gets." "There's more," I said. "Mike passed me an SD card. I haven't had a chance to check it." Marcus nodded. He pulled a thin, credit card-sized device from his wallet and slid it into the side of his phone. "Give it to me." I passed him the tiny card. He inserted it. An image appeared on his screen. It was a satellite photo, time-stamped from 3 days ago. It showed a remote airstrip in rural Virginia. On the tarmac was a private jet, its tail numbers clearly visible. "That jet belongs to Lockridge Dynamics," Marcus said, his voice grim. "Who's getting on it?" I asked. He zoomed in on the figures walking up the stairs to the plane. 2 of them were indistinct, but the third one was crystal clear. It was Ambassador Volkov. My blood turned to ice. Volkov wasn't just using a dead drop to pass files. He was meeting directly with the defense contractor at the center of the conspiracy. This was happening on our soil. "What were they doing?" I whispered. "We don't know yet," Marcus said, "but Sarah is working on something. She's been tracking encrypted data bursts coming from Lockridge headquarters for the past 48 hours. She thinks she's close to cracking them. She needed a sample of their internal network's handshake protocol. Something she could only get from inside one of their executives' homes." He looked at me, and I understood. "Finch," I said, "you want her to get inside Finch's house." "It's the only way," Marcus said, "but it's high risk. We don't have a warrant." "Then we don't use the front door," I said, my mind already formulating a plan. Daniel mentioned Finch is a fanatical gardener. He's got a greenhouse in his backyard. State-of-the-art, fully wired. I bet his home network router is in there. It was a long shot, based on a single piece of cocktail party chatter from months ago. But in my line of work, sometimes a long shot is all you have. "We need a diversion," Marcus said. "Something to get Finch out of his house for a few hours." I looked out the library window at my husband, who was laughing at a joke Mike had just told. He was the perfect diversion, and he would never even know he was a part of it. "I think I have an idea," I said. It's time my mother-in-law and I had a proper heart-to-heart. The plan was audacious, bordering on reckless. It relied on psychology, timing, and the calculated exploitation of my own family's dysfunction. I walked back out to the patio, my expression a carefully crafted mask of thoughtful concern. "Danny," I said, interrupting the cheerful banter. "I've been thinking, you were right, your mother. She was awful last night. And I think my running away with a headache probably just made things worse." Daniel's smile faded. "Izzy, you don't have to." "No, I do," I insisted. "We're family now, we can't just avoid each other. I think I should go over there, talk to her, clear the air." Marcus, Sarah, and Mike exchanged subtle, knowing glances. The first move of the chess game had been played. Daniel looked torn. "Are you sure? It's Sunday. She's probably at her house in McLean, and she'll have Finch with her. He never leaves her side on the weekends." "Perfect," I said. "Then he can be a witness to our reconciliation." My voice was sweet, but my eyes, meeting Marcus's over Daniel's shoulder, were cold as steel. An hour later, I was in my car, driving towards McLean, Virginia, home to the DC elite's sprawling suburban estates. I had called Alina, my voice dripping with contrition, and requested an audience. She had sounded surprised and deeply suspicious, but had agreed. The dutiful daughter-in-law was coming to bend the knee. She couldn't resist the opportunity to see me grovel. As I drove, my earpiece was live, feeding me updates from Marcus's team. "Sarah and Mike are in position," Marcus's voice crackled softly. "They have a line of sight on Finch's property. It's adjacent to the senator's, separated by a wooded creek." "Copy," I murmured, my eyes on the road. "The second you and the senator are inside, and we confirm Finch is with you, they'll move on the greenhouse." "Understood." Pulling up to the Vance estate was like arriving at a fortress. A high stone wall, wrought iron gates, and security cameras discreetly tucked into the ancient oak trees. The gates swung open as I approached. I had been expected. I parked in front of the stately Georgian mansion and took a deep, steadying breath. Showtime. Eleanor met me in the grand foyer. She was dressed in casual but expensive-looking cashmere. Arthur Finch stood just behind her, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Isabella," Eleanor said, her tone cool and appraising, "this is a surprise." "I'm sorry for dropping in unannounced," I said, injecting a note of humility into my voice. "But I felt I owed you an apology for my behavior last night. It was unbecoming." A flicker of triumph sparked in Eleanor's eyes. Finch's expression didn't change. "Well," she said, "at least you recognize it. Come into the sunroom. We can talk." As we walked, I kept my chatter light, talking about the party, the art, anything to fill the silence. I was buying time for my team. We settled into white wicker chairs overlooking a vast, manicured lawn. Finch remained standing by the door, a silent sentinel. "All right, Isabella," Eleanor said, getting straight to the point. "What is this really about?" This was the delicate part. I had to create a scene, a family drama so compelling that it would glue Finch to the spot, making him feel it was his duty to stay and protect his senator from her unstable daughter-in-law. "It's about Daniel," I began, letting my voice crack slightly. "He's worried. About you, about some files he found, payments, from an account called Lockridge." Eleanor's body went rigid. Finch took a half step forward. I had their full attention. "He thinks you're in some kind of trouble, Eleanor," I continued, letting a tear slip down my cheek. "He told me everything. He's terrified someone is blackmailing you, something to do with his father." "That boy is a fool," Eleanor hissed, her eyes darting towards Finch. "He's your son," I retorted, raising my voice. "And he loves you, and I love him, and I won't stand by and watch this. This secret destroy him? You have to tell us what's going on." My earpiece buzzed. A single, short tone. It was the signal. Sarah was in. "There is nothing going on," Finch said, his voice a low growl. "You are hysterical. Senator, I think this meeting is over." "No," I said, standing up. "I'm not leaving until she tells me the truth. Is it the Russians? Are they the ones blackmailing you?" Daniel found connections. I was improvising, throwing out bait, watching their reactions. Eleanor's face was a mask of fury, but behind it I saw a flash of genuine fear. Finch, however, was unnervingly calm. "You have a vivid imagination, Mrs. Vance," he said coolly, another buzz in my ear, longer this time. Sarah had what she needed. She was out. Mission accomplished. My demeanor shifted instantly. The tears vanished. The hysteria evaporated. I straightened up, my posture changing from that of a distraught wife to that of an officer. "You're right, Arthur," I said, my voice dropping to its normal, calm register. "I do have a vivid imagination. And right now, I'm imagining you, Ambassador Volkov, and a Lockridge Dynamics executive on a private airstrip in Virginia. I'm imagining a briefcase full of classified weapons schematics, and I'm imagining how all those things are connected to a shell corporation in the Caymans." Silence. The air in the sunroom was suddenly thick and suffocating. Eleanor stared at me, her face ashen. Finch's cool facade finally cracked. I saw a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic in his eyes before it was replaced by a cold, reptilian fury. "You have no idea what you're messing with," he snarled. "I think I do," I replied. "And you have no idea who you're messing with." I turned to my mother-in-law. "I came here to give you a choice, Eleanor," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You can be a witness or you can be a co-conspirator. You can be the patriot you've always pretended to be and help us uncover the truth about what your chief of staff and your corporate partners have been selling to our enemies, or you can go down with them. The clock is ticking." I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked out of the sunroom, leaving them frozen in a tableau of shock and dawning horror. As I walked through the foyer towards the front door, my burner phone vibrated. It was a message from Marcus. "Package acquired. Stanton is talking. We have everything. Stand by for extract." But as I reached for the front door, it was blocked. Finch was there. He had moved with a speed that belied his neat, tidy appearance, and in his hand was a small, black pistol fitted with a suppressor. "The meeting isn't over yet, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice a deadly whisper. "The senator has made her choice." Behind him, Eleanor stood in the archway, her face a pale, unreadable mask. She didn't say a word, she just watched. And in her silence, I got my answer. She had chosen her legacy over her country. She had chosen the lie. My world narrowed to the dark, circular void at the end of Finch's suppressor. My training took over, a cold, clear wave washing away the shock. I catalogued my environment. Grand foyer. Marble floor slippery. Heavy oak door behind me locked. Staircase to my right, a potential high ground. a large, ornate mirror on the left wall, a tool for misdirection. Finch was between me and any viable exit. Eleanor was his backstop, her silence a form of consent. "This is a mistake, Arthur," I said, my voice steady. My hands were held slightly away from my body, open and non-threatening. I was keeping his focus on me, on the conversation, buying myself seconds. Every second was a lifetime. "The mistake was marrying into this family," he replied, his eyes cold and flat. He was no longer a suspicious chief of staff. He was an operator whose cover had been blown, and his training was as deeply ingrained as mine. "You were an unknown variable. I told the senator from the beginning you were a risk." "And what now?" I asked, taking a tiny, almost imperceptible sidestep towards the mirror. "You shoot me here, in the senator's home. How do you explain that?" "An unfortunate domestic dispute," he said with a shrug. A distraught wife, unstable, perhaps armed, I was forced to defend the senator. A tragedy. "But the Vance name will endure. Your name, however, will be forgotten." He was already constructing the narrative. He was good, but he was monologuing. It was a classic villain's mistake. It gave me time. "And her?" I asked, nodding towards Eleanor. "Is she part of this? Did she know she was selling out her country, or were you just using her too?" Eleanor flinched, a flicker of emotion crossing her frozen features. I had hit a nerve. "The senator is a patriot," Finch snapped, his focus momentarily shifting to defend his queen. That was the opening I needed. I lunged to my left, not away from him, but towards the heavy, gilt-framed mirror. I slammed my shoulder into it with all my force. The antique glass shattered, exploding outwards in a shower of glittering shards. Finch reacted instantly, firing a single, muffled shot. The bullet went where I had been a second before, chipping a piece of marble from the floor with a sharp crack. The distraction worked. As he reflexively shielded his eyes from the spray of glass, I moved. I dove low, rolling behind a large marble pedestal that held a ridiculously expensive-looking vase. The vase wobbled, then crashed to the floor, adding to the chaos. I came up on one knee, my heart pounding a steady, furious rhythm against my ribs. I was unarmed, cornered, and my opponent had a gun. The odds were not good, but I had one advantage. He thought I was just a nosy wife who had stumbled into something over her head. He didn't know he was facing a combat-trained intelligence officer. He rounded the pedestal, the gun extended. I kicked out, not at him, but at the base of the pedestal itself. The heavy marble column, already unstable, toppled directly into his path. He stumbled back, forced to redirect his aim. I surged forward, inside his firing arc. I grabbed his wrist with both hands, slamming his gun hand against the wall with a sickening crunch of bone. He grunted in pain, but his grip on the weapon was like iron. We struggled, our bodies locked in a desperate, silent dance. He was stronger than he looked, wiry and tough. "Eleanor," I yelled, my voice raw. "Help me, what are you doing?" She stood frozen in the archway, her face a canvas of horror and indecision. She was watching her whole world burn down, and she didn't know which fire to put out first. Finch brought his knee up hard into my stomach, forcing the air from my lungs. My grip loosened for a split second. It was all he needed. He twisted the gun, trying to bring it to bear on me. I slammed my head forward, connecting with the bridge of his nose. He cried out, blood erupting, but he didn't let go. And then, a sound from outside, the roar of engines, the squeal of tires on gravel. Marcus. My extract team was here. Finch heard it too. Panic flared in his eyes. He knew his window was closing. He shoved me back hard, breaking my grip, and raised the pistol to fire. In that final, silent moment, as my life unspooled before my eyes, a decision was finally made in the archway. "No!" Eleanor screamed. She ran forward, not at me, but at Finch. She threw herself at his gun arm, her cashmere-clad body colliding with his with surprising force. It wasn't a trained move. It was the desperate, instinctual act of a mother trying to stop a catastrophe. The gun went off, the muffled phut loud in the enclosed space. Eleanor cried out, a sharp, ragged sound, and crumpled to the floor. Finch stared down at her, his expression one of pure disbelief. In that moment of stunned horror, his focus was completely off me. I didn't hesitate. I launched myself at him, my rage and adrenaline a potent fuel. This time, there was no finesse. It was pure, brutal force. I drove my elbow into his throat. As he gagged, I disarmed him, the pistol clattering to the marble floor. I followed with a series of precise, disabling strikes to his knee and shoulder. He collapsed, gasping and broken. I stood over him, breathing heavily, the adrenaline slowly beginning to recede, leaving a cold, shaking dread in its wake. Then I scrambled over to Eleanor. She was clutching her side, a dark, crimson stain spreading rapidly across the pale cashmere. "Aliner," I said, my voice shaking, "stay with me." The front door burst open. Marcus was there, flanked by 2 armed agents in tactical gear. They took in the scene in a split second, Finch on the ground, me with Aliner, the shattered mirror, the gun. "Medic," Marcus yelled into his radio. "Agent down." "No, civilian down. I repeat, civilian down." He rushed to my side. "Izzy, what happened?" She saved my life," I stammered, pressing my hands against Aliner's wound, trying to staunch the bleeding. "She stopped him." Aliner's eyes fluttered open. She looked up at me, her gaze clear and lucid for the first time since I'd met her. The arrogance, the condescension, it was all gone. All that was left was a raw, painful vulnerability. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice weak, Don't let him think his father." "I won't," I promised, my own tears now flowing freely. "I'll protect him, I'll protect your family, the real family, the one built on truth." She gave a small, faint nod, and her eyes closed. The aftermath was a blur of paramedics, federal agents, and the quiet, efficient cleanup of a national security crisis. Finch was taken into custody. Stanton's confession had given them everything they needed on the Lockridge conspiracy. The plot, it turned out, was simple and devastating. Lockridge was selling faulty weapons components to the U.S. military while selling the real, advanced schematics to the Russians, with Finch and Volkov acting as the brokers. Aliner's role had been to use her political influence to bury any investigations and ensure the contracts kept flowing. The payments Daniel had found weren't blackmail, they were her cut. Her father's legacy wasn't being protected, it was being sold off, piece by piece. Aliner survived. The bullet had missed any vital organs. Her recovery would be long, and her future would be spent not in the Senate, but most likely in a federal prison. In her confession, she claimed she had been manipulated by Finch, that she had been trying to protect a secret about her late husband. It was a partial truth, a final attempt to salvage a shred of dignity from the wreckage. She had made a choice in that final moment, a choice for family over conspiracy, but it was a choice that had come far too late. A week later, I sat with Daniel in the quiet, sunlit library of our home. The news was full of the Vance Lockridge scandal, though the public would never know the full story of the espionage and treason that lay beneath the headlines. I had told Daniel everything. The truth, raw and painful. I told him about my job, about the investigation, about his mother's complicity, and about her final, redeeming act. He listened in silence, his face pale, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. When I finished, he didn't speak for a long time, he just stared out the window. "All this time," he finally said, his voice raspy with emotion, "I thought you were living in my world, but I was the one living in yours. I was just too blind to see the walls." "We were living in our world, Danny," I said, taking his hand, "and it was real. This is the other part. The part I have to do so we can have the part that's real." He looked at me then, and his eyes were filled not with anger or betrayal, but with a new, profound understanding, and a deep, weary sadness. My mother, she spent her whole life building a legacy of power. She collected allies and assets, but in the end, the only thing that saved her was family. "Yes," I said softly, "it was." He squeezed my hand. "I don't know what happens now, but I know I don't want to lose you. I don't want any more secrets between us." "No more secrets," I promised. My work would continue. There would always be other threats, other shadows to navigate, but the line between my 2 lives had been erased. I was no longer Isabella Vance, the senator's daughter-in-law, or Lieutenant Commander Rossi, the intelligence officer. I was just Isabella, a woman who had fought for her country and in the process had been forced to redefine the meaning of her own family. True legacy isn't about power or prestige. It isn't about the name you inherit. It's about the choices you make when everything is on the line. It's about the truth you're willing to fight for and the people you're willing to protect. In the gilded cage of Washington, D.C., I had faced down spies and traitors. But the greatest victory was not thwarting a conspiracy. It was sitting here, in the quiet light of my own home, holding my husband's hand, finally, completely, and honestly myself.